Good evening to everyone present here. I am Pranay Nayak, a member of the Placement Committee, and I welcome you all to the third session of Lexpert 2021. Lexpert is an annual event which is initiated by the Placement Cell of KLE Society's Law College, where we invite experts from various fields to share their knowledge and experience with us. Our topic of discussion today is the career opportunities in space law. So let me introduce you to today's speaker. We have among us Mr. Bayar Goswami. Bayer is a doctoral student at the Institute of Air and Space Law, McGill University. He finished his first law degree in the year 2015 with distinction and honors in business laws from the Institute of Law, Nirma University, India. Thereafter, he pursued his LLM in Air and Space Law from the IASL, where he wrote a thesis titled Theorizing Cosmic and Environmental Law, which was dealing with cosmology and studying the Anthropocene epoch vis-a-vis the international environmental and space law. In addition to being an Arsenal Fellow, he was also awarded the Asad Qataite Graduate and Postdoctoral Fellowship by the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization in 2017. His worked as an Indian delegate to represent India's legal position at the 39th Triennial Assembly Session of the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization, which was held in October 2016. Further, he is a research coordinator and a member of the editorial team for the McGill Manual on the International Law, which is applicable to military uses of outer space projects. And he is also the principal researcher and associate director of the McGill Encyclopedia of International Space Law at spacelawpedia.com. He is a representative to the US Federal Aviation Administration's Center of Excellence for Commercial Space Exploration and has previously contributed significantly as a research assistant to key projects which is undertaken at the IASL, like the International Study on Global Space Governance and Space Security Index of 2016-2017. We welcome you, sir. Unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances, our second speaker won't be joining us today. So before we start the session, just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop the questions in the chat box and we'll bring them up during the presentation. Now, without any further ado, I will turn the time over to our moderator for today's session, Diksha and ICD. Thank you.
Hi, hello, good evening, everyone who is joining us from India, and a very early good morning to Bayer, who's joining us all the way from Montreal. It's 6:30 a.m. in the morning there. Thank you so much, Bayer, for joining us. Hi, everyone. My name is Diksha. Welcome to the third session of Lexpert 2021. I will be moderating this event along with my very dear friend Isiri. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to drop them in the chat box.
Yep. Let's kick off the session. Bayer, you graduated Nirma University in 2015 and then joined McGill University to pursue LLM in Air and Space Law. Could you please share with us your experience of studying at Nirma and McGill University?
Sure. So very good evening to all of you. I presume all of you are in India. And before I answer that question, thank you, Pranay and Diksha, for a very kind introduction and glorifying very little things that I've done. So thank you so much for that. And forgive me if I'm a bit flustered. It's 6:30 in the morning, that too on a Saturday. I wonder what's up with the youth in India that they want to attend sessions on Saturday evening, but welcome. So yes, thank you so much for having me, and I hope that the other panelist is feeling well. She did not join us. That's sad. Okay, so how was my experience at Nirma? Surprisingly very good. So I entered Nirma with quite a few doubts because, as with any NLU aspiring student, or as any student in India aspiring to be in NLU, and I could make it to, I think, Patiala and Patna, but I did not join it as yet. And then I already started my first year or the first semester at Nirma. And I had that perception and skepticism that, maybe this is not it and this is not good enough. But surprisingly, I quite liked it. And there was a lot of learning in terms of how to go about studying law and critical thinking. So something that I usually always say that for Nirma, I think something that I took away and my takeaway was really critical thinking and really deconstructing language and law, and that has gone a long way in um, just working how I work and just producing what I can produce and have been able to produce and whatever little I have achieved. Also, I mean, internships, although they were, uh, I mean, now I think it's common to every law school, but I think not every law school was doing it back then when we were doing it. So we had 9 internships, and I think I did 11 internships. I split one or two, and it was an amazing experience interning at different places, and also just knowing what not to do, because I interned at corporate law firms quite early on, and I kind of had the idea that that's not the lifestyle that I want or would want to live. So basically, running away from that, it was good to fall in love with international law and international space law, particularly. Um, Coming back to how has it been at McGill, it's been an amazing, amazing ride. I mean, looking back, I was pretty sure, I'm sure we'll discover that in a few of the other questions that you'll ask. I mean, I was pretty sure that I'm only coming here for the passion of space law and the love that I have for it, and I have no future as such beyond that I'm just coming here to study. And it's been what, almost 6 years now that I've been here and doing things, and it's been really wonderful. And I feel, I mean, it's really lucky to be where I am, and especially studying at McGill, the exposure, the faculty, the kind of people you meet, interact with, and space law universe is really very small. So the community, the fraternity that there is in space law, particularly, it kind of eventually ends up becoming like family. Like, you know, pretty much almost everybody, and then you interact with them, you associate with them, you work with them. So it's been a sweet ride. So anybody aspiring to be a space lawyer, do space law, thumbs up, come here, we'll get you sorted.
That sounds amazing, Bayer. I want to go a little bit back. Can you please tell us what motivated you to take up space law? Did your interest develop in the field while you were in law school itself, or when you were younger, or something?
Oh, well, yeah. When I was younger, I was into too many different things. Not law, not space, definitely. So something that really worked for me, I think, and it's a cliche in space law community, I think, because mostly everybody ends up falling in love. At least of, I hope I can say our generation. I'm not that old to you guys, but at least of our generation, I think works for. I mean, the normal story is that they did Manfred Lack's space law moot court competition and fell in love with space law. So that's the same thing, and I was kind of very sure that I wanted to pursue international law, and just wasn't, sure or be able to pinpoint as to what I exactly want to do in international law, because I did want to do something more specialized. And I ended up doing Manfred Lack's space law moot court competition. I was all in, and I just fell in love with space law, and I've been married to it. It's what I say for what, 7, 8 years now, 9 years to space law, and it's been an amazing marriage, I guess. So it's, yeah. So basically that, I mean, and what else in terms of substantially, if I had to reply to that question, I think it's the, first of all, the imagination that what could happen in space. Not very many fields of law give you that spark as to, oh, tomorrow there could be humans on the moon, or tomorrow there could be a legal issue about resources, space resources, extraction of space resources in outer space, or there could be a possibility of weaponization and fighting wars in outer space. And I mean, these are things that are outworldly, that are really, I mean, if you think about it, it's not figment of imagination anymore, and all of this is already happening, and a lot of resources, human resources and capital resources, are being put into issues like this, and developing technologies like this. And there is a lot of legal at the moment, I would want to say babble. There's a lot of legal babble around all of these issues, which is going to concretize very soon, I think. So really, it's that spark, it's that element of imagination, and second, I would say, is really. I mean, I don't want to sound very snobby about it, but I really genuinely do think that space law offers you that scope of interpretation that no other field of law really does, because what was set in 1950s or 1960s is, first of all, was really visionary. There's no other field of law, I can proudly say that, and I hope and fight me on that. I mean, there's no other field of law which has been so visionary and which has thought about balancing rights of states on an international plane. And it's really a product of its times in a sense that there were developing countries who were trying to assert their rights, especially in the new domain, and they had their recent experiences from the earth, basically, where they were subjugated, where they were suppressed. And so it I mean, Outer Space Treaty is truly a reflection of how international community now wants to stabilize equality or equal statehood or equal sovereignty in international plane, and that's reflected very well in the Outer Space Treaty. So it's really also about that element and that scope of interpretation in law that really, I mean, works for me, I think. So yeah, sorry, long answers.
That was really great and insightful. Generally, a lot of people have difficulty finding their passion at such an early stage. It is so great that you found yours in those formative years of your law school. So my next question also, could you please share with us some insights about the LLM program on space law which McGill University offers? Also, what LLM programs in the field of space law the students explore?
Okay, so I should be paid by McGill to promote them, I guess. um, so, I'm sorry, what was the question again? So LLM, how to, what's the exact question?
So I just wanted to know some insights about the LLM program which
Oh yeah,
McGill University is offering.
yes. So the LLM program here at McGill is a one-year program. Okay, McGill, pay me, please. More, I mean. So it's a one-year program, and there's two options to that. There's one thesis program and one non-thesis program. I chose the thesis program because I wanted to eventually get into academia. And has no connection to do anything with getting into academia. You could do a non-thesis program and get into academia, but it was just one off thing that I assumed that, oh, writing a thesis would be a good idea. Never a good idea. Just kidding. So yeah, so that's the program. So thesis program usually takes about 1.5, 2 years. It's slightly longer because people do want to take their summer off and write the thesis, or pretend to write the thesis and enjoy summer in Montreal. Um, and that's about it. And I mean, in terms of getting into it, they usually it's pretty straightforward. They usually just require a research proposal, kind of an SOP, and that's about it. And there are a bunch of fellowships which are really supportive. In terms of McGill and McGill supporting students, it's, I think, not that I have an experience of multiple international universities, but I can comparatively say, in terms of where few of my friends have studied, few of my colleagues have studied, I can comparatively say I think McGill happens to be one of the best universities in supporting students in terms of finances, in terms of health, any kind of resource that you want. I mean, it's really a wonderful place to be. And I know I'm making it sound like Hogwarts, but it really is. Sorry. What was the second question? I'm sorry.
So the second part of the question was what LLM programs in the field of space law should students explore?
No, only McGill. I mean, I only have one answer. So, I mean, truly, if you want to pursue space law or air and space law, both. I mean, whenever I say space, I also mean air. It's just that I don't love air law as much, but then the university does offer both. So, truly, I mean, if you really want to study at the best and you aspire to work with the best people, it's McGill. There's also Leiden, but we don't want to talk about that. Um, no, that's also a wonderful place to be. It's Europe, but yeah. Anyway, but then I mean, for me, the McGill pedagogy, the McGill curriculum, the McGill style of teaching is really something that worked for me, and I think it has worked for everybody I've known here who have come after me, before me. So it really does give you a lot in sense of it's almost like a family. It's very nurturing. So it's not only just about studying here, but it's also about soft personal things that the institute does and reach out and goes out of way to do it for you. So it's really wonderful. So I mean, truly, and if and I understand not everybody is in a position and has the resources to come all the way to Canada. In India, I'm not sure if the NUJS, I think, had the program, or the Hyderabad NLU had the LLM program. I don't know if they still have it. But then, if you're truly that passionate about international space law and air and space law, I would truly say just go do it. I mean, there's no stopping anybody with potential anywhere. It's not the universities that make students, it's the students who make students. And I think that's also a huge takeaway for most of us at NIRMA. I mean, we are doing wonderful things, all of us at NIRMA, especially my batch and the batches after that, they're doing wonderful things. And it has nothing to do with how your university is placed in terms of the stereotypical ranking or whatever. It's really what you make of it and what you want to do about it. So, I mean, huge thumbs up to every NLU and non-NLU person. Just do your best and you'll find your place.
So everyone who wants to do an LLM in space law, go run to McGill University for sure.
Yeah, come to McGill University for sure. And if you can't make it, do it anywhere. And I'm sure your passion and love will find you wherever you want to be found. So don't worry about it. Just, I mean, students in India, they stress a lot, I think. I mean, including me, and I'm still stressing. But still, I mean, eventually everything works out. So just take it easy, do what you love with full heart. Yeah.
So, Bar, could you also enlighten us with some tips for students who want to apply for an LLM in air and space law?
Yeah, I mean, I say this over and over again, and people who have watched my other videos or whatever, and not that I would want them to, but if they have, I mean, the only tip that I would give to anybody would be to have a story to yourself. I mean, don't come across as, oh, today I decided to do space law and I'm going to apply to a bunch of random universities, and I have done nothing in my life to indicate that I have this passion or um, anything to do with space law. So all of your curriculum vitae and all of your profile suggests that you wanted to be a corporate lawyer, and suddenly you're applying to. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people change streams, but then have that the least bit of indication in terms of passion, in terms of storytelling in your documents, because to anybody who's assessing your profile, they're basically assessing your journey, they're basically assessing your qualifications and as to what you have done to be able to do what you're wanting to do, right? So if anybody is reading that, they should have at least a sense that you're passionate about it, and this is not just a one-off random application, because there's no dearth of applications to best universities, including Leiden and McGill. So they assess, I'm sure they assess like 150 applications per year or more, right? So if anybody is reading 150 applications, it's very easy to assess, especially comparatively as to whose passion is clearly reflective than this other random profile, right? So always have, I would strongly suggest, if possible, to the best extent possible, generate a story for yourself, generate a narration that leads you to where you want to be. It's not just one random thing, right? So if you're wanting to, let's not just make it about space law. To any LLM, I would say, if you're wanting to do human rights, if you're wanting to do arbitration, have a story to yourself, have something to write about yourself that would make you stand out, have something that would point to, oh, you have invested yourself in doing this, and that's your journey. So that's one thing. I mean, I can go on and on about how to write proposals and how to write SOPs, but the one thing that I would, again, just uh, one pointer, if I had to give in writing those documents, that would be write positively. There's a lot of, I mean, everybody has negative uh, points to tell. Oh, I failed that exam. Oh, I had a gap year. But then make it into something constructive and positive. So if you had a gap year, um write your learning about that year, right? Instead of saying, oh, I had a gap year because of da da da. And what that does is that leaves the reader with an impression, oh, that's a pitfall, right? Or that's something that bad happened. But then if you write it in a way that it suggests or narrates a story which is, oh, this person learned from this. And it's not about those corporate things, this is my strength and weakness, da da da. I mean, everybody does that. It's not about that. It's genuinely about writing positive language. And there's a lot. I mean, I still do. I used to do a lot in the previous years. I used to do a lot of mentoring for SOPs, and I would usually see this, particularly in Indian students, that they would write either very flowery language in their SOPs, that, oh, roses are red, violets are blue, da da da, woods are lovely, dark and deep, mice to go before I sleep. I mean, everybody is tired of it. Come on, guys. Let's get a hang of real life, and let's be. I mean, at least my approach to writing SOP is very to the point, professional. It has no poetry. That works for some people, but I don't know why. I am still trying to understand why admissions committees still want to um, linger on many of the personal stories. Maybe it reflects, I mean, whatever. I don't want to get into it. But yeah, so don't be flowery. I mean, you can be flowery, but then everybody knows that there's an extent to it, there's a limit to it, and write positively. I mean, there's huge difference in writing something, I failed the exam, versus um, I took the opportunity to learn it better. There's a difference there, right? So do that. I mean, it really changes a lot of, and maybe it's just a bad example, but then write to me. I'll help you. And how many participants we have now? 62. Yeah, I'll help you write 62 SOPs. Let's do this. So that would be the tip. I think that those would be the 2 tips or 3 tips that I would really give to anybody aspiring to do an LLM. Is there a question in the chat? Okay, does work
Thank you
experience
so
count?
much, Bayer. That was very great advice.
I think my IC is having some network issues. But I want to ask you that we all appreciate the importance of internships during our law school journey. Uh, and I know that you have interned under late Professor B.S. Mani. So can you please share with us the experience of working with him, under him, and what are the other internship opportunities which are available in India for students who want to gain more experience in this field?
Sure. So God bless his soul. First of all, I mean, he is an amazing, amazing person and mentor or professor. Even before getting to the experience, one tip again I would give is generate your own opportunities, right? So no, there was no advertisement or there was no call for applications for interning under PS Money. Um, it was me who I approached him. And I mean, don't hesitate to, I mean, of course there's a boundary line as to don't pester people, but then of course write to people. Just, I mean, usually in my experience, most people, at least in academia and otherwise, are really wanting to help you, right? They would there are nice people out there who would want to help you, who would want to mentor you. So just don't hesitate to write to anybody, and do it genuinely. Don't just write a random email which was copy pasted from your previous internship email. Like genuinely reach out to people and ask questions that have substance, that have sincerity, and most of the times you would be surprised how helpful people are. So generate your opportunity. I mean, it wasn't a call of application, or it wasn't whatever. I just wrote to him randomly that there's nothing to do about space law in India, and you're the only person I've ever heard of who's doing something about space law or has done something about space. So how about I come to, I think he was in Jaipur then, and how about I come to Jaipur and work under you? And he was more than happy to have me. I mean, what does he have to lose, right? He did not have to pay me. He did not have to write any paper with me. It was just me doing research under his guidance, and it's just the interactions that are a huge takeaway. I mean, I could have done the same research without his name, without his da da da. But then it's the interactions, it's the insight that he had on the research that I produce. It's the interpersonal relation that we developed, right? It's that is what the takeaway is. And of course, his recommendation, I mean, spoke miles about what I've done. And not that I had done a lot, but then just coming from him to get into McGill, I think I would genuinely think it was a huge factor that played a role in my admissions at McGill. So, I mean, generate your opportunities. Working under him was, of course, amazing. There was a lot of in-person insight because he had been involved in um, how do you say, drafting a negotiation of treaties in person at many of the forums and for countries and states. So I mean, it was really an amazing experience just to know him as a person, as a mentor. And of course, his insights on the research that I undertook was also really profound, and it went a long way in understanding how international law works, not particularly space law, but also international law works. So that's that. Yep. I mean, that was amazing. What other internship opportunities in India? Yeah. I mean, stop writing to me, guys. I don't have internship for you. I'm so sorry. I mean, it breaks my heart every time I read an email that if there's an internship I can provide, or if they can work under me. I don't. I mean, I would want you to write my thesis, but we can't do that. Sorry. So yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have an internship opportunity as such with me or at McGill to suggest. But in India, I don't know at the moment anybody who's doing that kind of work that would be fruitful. Of course, I think there used to be some internship opportunity at ISRO, but I'm not sure where does that stand. Maybe, I mean, if we had the second speaker on board, I think she had more domestic experience, so she would have been a better guide. But I'm, to be honest, not very sure. There used to be an internship that I did at the Ministry of External Affairs back then, which is not about space law, but closely related to international law. And maybe you could, divulge your way into and basically hypnotize them into believing that you would do something about space law. So if that works, I mean, heads up, you could try that venue. You could also explore the possibility of the Indian International Society of International Law, whatever that's called, working there. But I mean, internship's not really necessary as long as you're invested in the research or the little things that you can at any age otherwise do. So just strive, I guess. It's not important to work under somebody, or just do your own thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bharat. Moving on to the main topic of the session, what are the career opportunities in air and space law available in India and abroad?
Yeah, I would change that question altogether, right? So, I mean, if it was I mean, it's also about a lot about journeys, right? So it's been my journey, and my journey has never been about, strictly speaking, the Indian idea of career, that there's a job after this or there's a placement after this. And people usually just end up writing emails to me that what are the placement opportunities at McGill. I mean, that's not how it works, right? I mean, in India as well, hardly barring the top NLUs, there is hardly any placement happening, like meaningful placement happening, right? I mean, there's a lot of emails. Okay, don't kill me, KLE. A lot of placements are happening, guys. Sorry, but no, but truly, I mean, I think we have to change this idea of education for job. And I know it sounds like tall orders and all of that. Da da da. Am I allowed to say? Okay, no. Sorry for the cuss word. So it's all that, but really, I mean, if you do what you want to do, I mean, that's been my journey, and I would say that I have subscribed to it, and I'm living through it, and maybe I'll end up having a job, maybe not. I mean, the cat is still out there, right? So, so I mean, what are career opportunities? Okay, there's a lot to do. So you could be in academia, you could be working for policy think tanks or think tanks otherwise, you could be working for government organizations, you could be working for international organizations, you could be working for corporate firms, because now they are also dealing with space law. But then you have to differentiate between what space law is in terms of when I speak space law versus what space law is in terms of when national jurisdiction law speaks space law. So when a national jurisdiction, when they call themselves space lawyers, I beg to differ. I don't think they're space lawyers, because they're ending up doing contracts, and which is just because the contract has launch system and a launch service written in it, it does not make it space law. It's still, I think, contract law. But then, I mean, of course, there's this nuance to that. They are still dealing with, maybe, let's say, if you're talking about the US, they're still dealing with the Commercial Space Act, and they're still dealing with space law. So there's a difference in between what I do in terms of international space law versus space law as a domestic national lawyer. So you could do that. There's a lot of market there and developing market there. But then again, as a student, I believe most of the audience is from India. As a student from India, I would say it's a bit tough to break through the market in terms of space companies and space consultancies, if you want to target those, because there's a lot of nuance in terms of how do I say, national regulation, because a lot of space technology is closely also associated with defense technology, and most of the national laws prohibit international students or international foreign alien residencies or aliens to the country to work in that industry, right? So sorry guys, but if you're aspiring to work for SpaceX, it's just not yet possible unless you're a US citizen, right? Or unless, I mean, SpaceX wants you real bad, and I would be your fan if that happens. But then that, yeah. So in terms of career opportunities, there are many, but then the whole idea of, oh, if I do this LLM, would I get a job? No. 99% of the times, no. Do this LLM or any LLM, I think, for the knowledge of it, the exposure of it, and for the love of it. Stop chasing. A lot of emails or a lot of contacts that I receive are just, they're wanting to postpone their, oh, I don't have a job yet, or I'm not satisfied with my job yet, and hence I want to do an LLM so that I'll kill the time and maybe there'll be a better opportunity. Stop doing that, guys. I mean, you're just postponing the problem. Let's get this real. So, I mean, I don't want to sound discouraging at any front. I mean, there's a lot of career opportunities that are there. It's just that they're not as apparent, or there's no campus placement, is all I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bayer. That was very informative, actually. So you have extensively researched and published papers on various areas of space law, and you're also working as a research coordinator with McGill University. What tips or advice would you give to a fresh graduate who wants to build a career as a researcher, especially in this particular field of law?
Yeah, I'll give an advice that at the moment I'm failing to follow myself. And it's a very sad state of affairs of academia, particularly if you're wanting to research. Publish or perish. I mean, it's at times a lot of and I hate to say that this is I think it really is a sad state of academia. It really pushes you to the what I call, or maybe somebody else is also calling it, I call the industrialization of academia. The whole hype about keep publishing and keep generating papers in terms of that your name is everywhere, and I fail to follow that because I really take my own sweet time to come to something that's more quality, and it takes a long time for me to write papers. But then there are wonderful, amazing, talented people out there who can really publish in a matter of 15-20 days and keep churning out papers like that. So if you really want to get into research and academia, I would say, I mean, subscribe to the rule of publish or perish. I mean, there's nothing like that, and that it's sad that that's the way the industry works, the academia works. But then it's sad. But then that's how it is. In terms of tips on researching and how to be a researcher, I think law makes, at least in my opinion, law makes you a great researcher, because then you, at least the way I dealt with understanding law and going about it, it really makes you a great researcher, because you're always wanting to dive deep, dig deep. You're always wanting to know that, or what else could be the interpretation of this, and how else can I find a source to support that, right? And that innate um, instinct that you are always um, almost beaten to learn in universities is something that's really crucial in researching, I think. So that, and what else? Reading, I think. Keep reading. I mean, don't stop. And by reading, when I say reading, I don't say just academic reading, just a lot of literature which is out there in terms of associated disciplines, right? It's like, if you're reading about space law, you don't just necessarily have to read only space law, because that could be quite limited. Also read about how it's working in the technology world. Also read about how it's in the international relations policy, right? So cross discipline studies, multidisciplinary studies. Like my LLM thesis was, it was just one chapter about law, which was also insufficient, I think. So the majority of that thesis was just about cosmology, philosophy. It was about Anthropocene, environmental ethics. So I took a totally different tangent, and I came to be known, and sadly I came to be known as a space lawyer because of that thesis. But then it's hardly anything about space law, right? It's only the philosophizing or theorization of what cosmic environmental law means, or what it could mean, and which had very little to do with what outer space treaty or international space law do or say. But then it's about the ideation and creation of what could be and what the ethics are, right? So do go beyond the constructs of research, because at time research in itself could be quite limiting, because then you're working on constructs that don't necessarily work very well, in terms of, oh, if this is the subject, this is my boundary. Don't do that. Just, if research takes you somewhere, it really genuinely guides you somewhere, follow the path, and just come back, sometimes disheartened, sometimes enlightened.
Thank you so much, Bayer. Now let's take up a few questions from the audience. They seem to be very eager. So the first question is, how do you see India at par with the developed nations in relation to air and space law regulations?
Okay, developed nations. So India sadly does not have, as far as last time I checked, any space law as such. There's only few policy directions or citations that can be used to closely relate to space law, and it's a very hush hush and very state bound um, domain of law and activities, I think, so far yet. So there's not much happening. So to compare, there should be something to compare. So at the moment, there really isn't anything to compare, and that's a good and bad thing. Good thing, because just because lawyers want it, there shouldn't be any law, right? There should be law if there is regulation of activities. Are there activities? Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of muzzled voices, and there's a lot of undercurrent in wanting to do things in terms of startup culture, in terms of da da da. And I do know a few people who are genuinely invested and involved in doing space activities in India, and they are on some fronts facing legal problems in terms of how to go about it in India. So yes, for them, maybe a regulation would be a good thing, but my skepticism with that is when the government or the document that's been out there for 3 or 4 years, if that comes in place, that's insufficient. That's not going to help what the real people who are wanting to get out there. So it's better to not rather have that law and trying to work your way around it rather than have it enforced without actually realizing the groundwork that the law needs. So at the moment, the drafts, the 2 or 3 drafts that I have reviewed that was sent to me and McGill, I think insufficient, guys. I mean, India just wants to copy paste laws from. I'm sorry, I don't want to sound that like that person, a person who went to Canada and wants to bash on India. No, although I do love doing that, but particularly that piece of law, really, I mean, it's really a half-hearted copy of. Um, I don't want to say which country, but then whatever. So it's a half-out copy of and a mix and match of multiple countries. So that really, what I think is lacking is the vision, is the original idea as to what the country needs in terms of regulation, and does it really need a law at the moment? So in comparison, where does India stand? Not anywhere, I think, in terms of law. And does it have to stand anywhere should be the real question. I don't think as yet, I don't really think there's any need. Things are good. If you want to really give that inertia to develop a space industry of private activities, then okay, there could be a law, but then that has to be visionary and that has to not be a copy paste. So that's the response.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question. What is the role of a legal professional while working with an aerospace organization? What are the various tasks undertaken on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, the question is pointed as if I work for a space organization, but okay, I'll assume that. So if I work for a space organization as a lawyer, I would assume my okay, I'm okay. Let me do this way. I'm recently involved with one actually. So what I'm projected to do is basically, so space organizations or space companies, or law firms. I don't know what's the exact question, but okay. So space organization and companies, they would expect you as a legal professional to work with them in terms of acquiring permissions, let's say, to launch or to build a satellite. So all of those permissions in terms of, I don't know what the corporate term for that would be. Now I'm too far away from corporate law, but then whatever that's called, right? Due diligence and all of that. So you'd have to do that. Plus you'd have to do obtain licenses. You'd have to work with contracts team and build contracts in terms of services that you would want to acquire and provide. So all of that, so it's that pretty much in terms of what a company asks from us in-house space lawyer. There could also be huge workload in terms of export controls, because a lot of space technology is exported, imported, and a lot of countries have huge embargoes and restrictions and regulations on what can go out and what can come in. So US would basically make it impossible for US technology to be used or transferred elsewhere unless that is it complies with the law, right? So anybody who's wanting to do that, and I'd be dealing with that in the coming months, and I don't know how, but anybody who's wanting to do that would have to have the mastery of the export control regime, the ITARs, right? So a lot of those things. So it's mostly about compliance. I would say if I had to give it one word, it's about compliance and contracts. That's what that person in that company is doing. Of course, this is an outside perspective. I think if many of you guys don't know, I mean, shout out to Joyita. I think Joyita is involved in Joyita Chatterjee. I think she was a student at JNLU and then at McGill a long time even before me. So if you're wanting to get into that sphere of space law where private practice is happening, I think she should be the person. I think she's still involved in doing that. So she should be the person approached. So yeah.
Our next question is from Ayush sir. Does work experience count while applying for doctoral program at McGill? And is there a system of sponsorship there?
So hi Ayush, I know Ayush from a long time. He's a wonderful person. Um, I believe all of you are students. So yay.
Yes.
So he's an amazing person, right? So yeah, work experience required for doctoral? No. The only doctoral degree that I think requires work experience, I think, goes to the management side of world. So I don't think in law, at least at McGill or in Canada, you require work experience to be a doctoral candidate. Um, what's the other question I'm forgetting? Sponsor. Do they sponsor the doctoral program? So I think you mean fellowship. Yes, there. So every doctoral degree in Canada, I think, yes, in Canada, is a funded degree. So there is no PhD in Canada that's happening. At least in law, I can say confidently, that's happening without funding, right? So yes, if you get into McGill or any other reputed university in Canada, the doctoral programs are always funded, and they're usually funded for 3 years. And there's a minimum funding that you get, and then there is a bracket which fluctuates every year depending on what the budgets and the fiscal um, performance has been for the university for that year. So that there's a varying range, but then there's a guaranteed funding for 3 years, and that's just what the university gives you. So then there are other funding opportunities. You could apply for federal funding, which is Canadian government has a bunch of scholarship for international students and Canadian students that are doing PhD. There's a lot of trust fellowships, like the one that I had, Arsenal Trust Fellowship, right? It's just for space law. So if anybody wants to do a space law doctoral, Arsenal at least used to be. I'm not sure if they're giving it anymore, but yeah. So there's tons of fellowship. It's just a matter of how you approach them and write the application. But to answer very specifically to Ayush, yes, all doctoral programs are funded.
Thank you so much, Payal. Unfortunately, due to the paucity of time, we will not be taking any further questions. And that concludes our third session of Lexpert 2021. Now, I hand it over to Manoj sir to speak a few words.
And awkward silence. I mean, I have time, guys. I mean, it's Saturday morning for me, so I can take one or two more questions if Manoj sir is still finding his way to Zoom.
I think he's having some trouble with his mic. Just a few moments.
No, no problem.
Thank you. You are supposed to make me co-host, or you have to unmute me. Yes, if Mr. Bay Goswami is still having a time, we will take a few more questions. He's kind enough to take a few more questions. Are there questions, Aisuri?
Yes, sir. So another question would be, general courses on space law tend to only talk about registration of vessels and IPR laws. How much of importance do they actually have, and what should they focus more upon?
Okay, I don't know. I mean, where are these general courses on space law that only talk about registration of vessels and IPR? But okay, maybe there are. I haven't taken those courses, but um, okay, what should be the importance? I think to study space law, the importance really should be to master outer space treaty. And if you master that, and if you master the nuances that there are in outer space treaty, and that's not just limited to registration, it's also limited to state responsibility. The whole idea of state responsibility under international law versus how it works in international space law. That's very peculiar, right? It's very, very different. That's very unique to space law. So if you understand what that relationship is in between international law and the peculiarity in space law in terms of state responsibility, that's very important thing to learn, I think, in space law. Also liability. I mean, there are bunch of very difficult questions that particularly we are dealing with at the moment, in terms of military activities, or in terms of just um, what's called vessel, but it's actually space objects. So there's really difficult questions in terms of liability, in terms of what launching state is, in terms of who registers the space object, right? In terms of even who qualifies to be an astronaut. Is Jeff Bezos now an astronaut under international space law just because he touched the rim of outer space, or is he not? So there are really those difficult questions in terms of, so I would not say, I mean, IPR is not even a challenge to me in space law. And I don't know why the space law fraternity is a bit obsessed with IPR in space law, but it shouldn't be at the moment, because it's, to me, it's a simple question. The difficult questions really are within space law with respect to responsibility, liability, and um, registration, I think. And if you master those, or you don't have to master those, if you just understand the nuances and have questions to ask, you don't have, like, I don't have all the answers that space law poses, right? Because it's very difficult to answer anything without development of law. So it's very difficult, but you have to ask the right question and know in depth to ask those questions. So it's just about getting there.
Let's take the last question. I have been a space fanatic. So Sarthak is saying this. I have been a space fanatic as long as I've known. So I would like to know how much of the work in the field actually deals with things that are off the ground.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting question. So I can answer this in two ways. So a simple way would be everything, right? Everything that is in international space law is technically off the ground. The only in on the ground or in airspace on the ground part is the launching service, or launching, the act of launching space in outer space, which is only has to do with liability. I think that has to do with the ground segment. Everything else really is space segment, right? um, that brings us to the question, where does space begin, right? And that's a question that troubles everybody. Like, and there could be a very simple answer to it. It could be 80 kilometers, it could be 100 kilometers where the space begins. But there is a nuance, and there is an insight into why states don't want to draw that boundary just yet, because there are technologies that are still evolving, and you wouldn't want to call anything that flies 79 kilometers a space object, because then entirely different liability and responsibility regime applies to you, and it's more stringent, and it's more incriminating in a sense, and then states don't want to do that, right? So how much does space law deal with space? Interesting question. It depends on where space begins, and I don't think it's also dependent just on that, but everything that I do in terms of interpreting, writing, researching law, everything is space. So it's nothing about. So the only people I mean, I don't want to rant about it, but the only people who are not dealing with space law and I have a beef with, and they're called space law, is the corporate lawyers who write agreements, and they think just because launch service is mentioned, it's space law. Not really, but then could be. I mean, if they're dealing with domestic space law. But then again, yeah, so everything that Jolie space law deals with is out there in space. You don't get to go just yet, but then hopefully in 20 years, space lawyers will be in space as well.
I see. If there are no questions, I have just a request to make to Mr. Bayer. Space law being one such area where we see interaction between law and technology. And in that area, we come across these moots like Mansford Lache space law moot. So I would like to request you to give a piece of advice to our students as to how to prepare for these space law moots.
Sure. I mean, my mooting record is not as splendid as many of Indian students. I mean, they do just wonderful things, and I'm just always so inspired by how Indian law students perform at Moot. So I wasn't a great mooter in terms of being a great oralist. Uh, what I did do and what really worked for me was being a great researcher and doing it in depth and wholeheartedly. So mooting can be approached two ways, right? So if you want to approach it in terms of skill building, then I would say become a researcher, also an oralist. I mean, that's a great skill to have. But then if you really want, because most of the oralists that are working in Moot have always been a great oralist in school, or they have been doing it in debates, da da da. But then what you really want to develop in a law school is the art of researching, and it's the art of, crunching the law, fiddling with law, really, right? And if you don't do that, and if you just want to glamorize that I spoke well, okay, well and good, you got the award. But then is there learning to that? Of course, there's, I mean, interpersonal skills, there's speaking skills, but then truly, like, what you paid for is a law degree and to learn legal knowledge. So I would say that, I mean, it's a most controversial opinion, I guess. Strive to be a researcher, not an oralist. And these law students fight among themselves to be an oralist. And in my Moot team, I think we always had, like, I was always an oralist, but we were all researching equally. It was not about that the oralists are not researching or not drafting the memo. So how to go about that? Breaking down of issues is the most important thing that anybody could ever do and teach. I think I have done this with a lot many Moot teams from India, and at McGill, people just fail to realize how important it is to actually get to the contentious issues, because there's, with every Moot problem, there's a lot of universe to the problem, which is very unimportant. Like, what the astronaut's name is irrelevant. Like, he could be Ram, Sham, Harry, Tom, right? And it's irrelevant. What the action is being done and what that means in legal sense is what law students often get flustered by, often fail to draw a line that this is irrelevant to the problem and this is what the legal contention is. So just breaking down, and this takes, I mean, in my opinion and my experience, this takes at least 10 to 12 sittings of hours together to just get to just stand in front of a board with a chalk and start breaking things down in a problem, and that works amazing. So the sooner you get to the heart of the problem, the heart of what the legal contentions are and what the moot point is, the sooner your actual research begins. Otherwise, all you're reading is a bunch of random articles on random topics, which in the end you don't end up using, or if you do, it's just half-hearted work, right? So just breaking down of issues is the thing to go about moots. And thank you for that question. I mean, it's very important.
That's a very good piece of advice to our students. Definitely, they will keep that in mind. Yes, I see. If there is no other formality, shall I go ahead with?
Sure, sir.
Yes. Okay. It's obligation as well as a sense of responsibility for me as IQAC coordinator here at Kelly Law College. I thank Mr. Bay Goswami for sparing his time to share his knowledge on air and space law with the students and guiding them for their further studies also. At the same time, I thank my mentor coordinator, Ms. Dipali Hiremat, for coordinating such a meaningful event and helping the students to know the nuances of corporate law, energy law, and space law. That will definitely go a long way in deciding, helping the students to decide their career perspectives or opportunities out there in the world. So with this, we have come to the end of Lexpert series of 2020-21. Once again, I thank the mentor coordinator and all the student coordinators for making such a meaningful event. Thank you one and all.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. I just say, yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
I just want to thank everybody for having me, and just how many ever. I mean, I know I'm inviting trouble for myself, but all 60 people, feel free to write to me on anything ever that you think I can be helpful with. Just feel free. I'll make sure to respond in as quickly as possible. So
I
thank you
think
so
you.
much for having me.
Yes,
I, I think you stole my thunder by saying you're
Go
inviting
ahead.
them, the 60 people all together. I was going to say that, like, you're going to take a lot of trouble for that.
That's no problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. So with this, we are at the end of the third session of Lexpert 2021. And I, Manasvi Kumar, on behalf of the Keli Society's Law College, would like to extend my profound gratitude to you, Mr. Bayer Goswami, for all this informative knowledge and insights that you've given us. And this deep insights that you're talking about with respect to space law, I think it's revealed some of like very interesting facts about space law that we wouldn't, be exposed to otherwise. So I'm really thankful for that. And thank you, sir, for taking your time out of your busy schedule and making this event a success. So
That
I
sir
would
is not
also.
me, right? That sir is Manoj sir, Ayush sir, and all of the other sirs, because I don't like to be called sir. Just call me Bayaj. Yeah, thank you so much again. I mean, thank you for having me. It's a wonderful thing to be interacting after a long time with students from India. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to be talking. And it's wonderful to see Ayush finally. Thank you.
Right. So I would also extend my special thanks to our principal, Dr. J.M. Mallikarjunaya sir, our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Manoj Kumar B. Hiremat sir, and our faculty coordinator, Deepali Hiremat ma'am. They've provided us with immense encouragement to make this event again a success. So also I would be remiss if I didn't thank my fellow Lexpert committee members and also the participants for being here and making this event grand. Thank you so much.
Do we clap? We should.
Yourself, sir, sure.
Oh no, not for me, for the management. Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you to the management for making this possible.
Thank you everyone to be a part of the team. Thank you, Baya. So I'm going to end the meeting now.